Rosemary, will you be quiet, please?
Shut up!
Yeah, that's what I was trying to encourage you to practice your own words, Rosemary. I was just talking to my wife just before I came away. She was saying that she was out with our 6-year-old grandson today, and they went to a whole lot of places, and she said, "Ernie, wasn't that an adventure?" And he said, "Mammy, that was so 100% not an adventure." He said, "An adventure would be if I'd slain a dragon with a sword." So the boy we should encourage his imagination. I think he'll go places. Pam got me to take out my description of Axel in the newsletter. She said it wasn't fair. So I'll say it here.
Because Pam's not around.
Yeah, that's right. She can't tell me to shut up. Yeah, I know. I described Axel as a witty engineer, which is almost an oxymoron. Yeah. And can I say to that bastard over there is an engineer? Yes, he's almost witty too, really, isn't he? There's 2 of them in Christchurch. But anyway, this particular road, the Northern Arterial, was where I first cut my teeth in local body politics. And 4 of us formed a residents association, and I went to the Environment Court the day after and said I was the chairman of the St Albans Residents Association. And the judge who heard it described me as the self-appointed chairman of the St Albans Residents Association. And he gave us 3 months, I think, to prepare our case. And the interesting thing, we failed in the Environment Court, and the judge gave the city and transit and ECan 5 years to build the road. And the interesting thing was that 2 local MPs affected, Jeff Palmer and David Cagle, appointed Jan Wright to Transit Board to stop it at transit, which she did. And then the City Council and ECan said that they were going to pick the project up. It was originally a 6-lane road that was going to go right up Barbata Street, fly over the top of the railway and out through town. And the transit owned 95% or 90-something% of the houses that they wanted. There were hundreds and hundreds of houses. And so I stood for the City Council to stop it at the council, and that was my job, and I succeeded there. And that's when the designation was uplifted. But can I say, engineers are like rust, they continue. And even when the rest of us are asleep, but Axel's an engineer who's taken them on. So, away you go.
Thanks, Gary, for those words. And just out of historical interest, some 20 years ago or so, at the time I was working for Christchurch City Council, and I was a bit clean out, and I thought, we can't throw that in the skip. Here's the Christchurch Northern Arterial design from 1987. So if you want to have a little look at what it looked like at that point in time, feel free to have a little browse. And interesting that you reflect on that this got you started in politics. I mean, this isn't why I am running for office at the moment, but maybe this gets me into politics, I don't know. So here we go. Let's see where this gets us. So this is about the Northern Arterial and climate change, and in this talk I will cover the recommendations from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, talk about the transport emissions that we produce in Christchurch, then come to the Northern Arterial, and then draw some conclusions. So Christchurch City Council did some work on where do we actually emit our greenhouse gases here in Christchurch. And what they found was 53% of our locally produced greenhouse gases come from transport. So one would think, well, if we wanted to do something about our emissions footprint, that is what we target. So the question is, how do we travel? And how do we change travel behavior of people? And looking at the IPCC recommendations, how much do we have to actually change our behavior? You will probably remember when the IPCC published its fifth progress report last October, because the media really picked up on that, talking about we have 12 years to limit or avoid a climate catastrophe. And so what it actually says in the summary report is if we want to have a 50% chance of staying within a 1.5 degrees of warming, what we need to do is we need to reduce our level of carbon dioxide emissions by 45% measured against the level where we were in 2010. So if we assume that each sector that's contributing to greenhouse gas emissions in each area reduces its own impact, how much would we have to reduce driving in Christchurch? And to answer that question, what we do is we look at the household travel survey data that the Ministry of Transport compiles at a city level, and we see that in Christchurch we are just in 2010 we were just shy of 3.5 billion kilometers that we drove that year. And if you further assume that greenhouse gas emissions is directly proportional to the distance driven, which is too silly an idea, then we'll see what a 45% reduction looks like. We go to down there. And if you then further think that, let's just put a straight line from here to here, and then work out what the annual reduction in driving required from us as a society is, then you're unfortunately wrong, because what we've done since is we have reduced our driving from 2010 to now by roughly about 15%. Increase. Sorry, did I say reduced?
Yes. That would have been great.
I'm thinking of what we ought to be doing, I suppose.
We know what you mean.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Thank you. So, what that now means is we now have 11 years left to meet that lofty goal that the IPCC has given us. And what it means is, because we have actually increased it to this level, from now, for the next 11 years, each year, we have to reduce our distance driven in Christchurch by just shy of 5%. That's massive. That's absolutely massive. How would we go about achieving that? Or maybe we don't need to achieve that. Maybe we agree that as a society, well, our children and grandchildren, they can knock it out. I don't know. So, but further to this, some other high-level stuff. Greater Christchurch, so that's from Rangiora, Kaiapoi, Pegasus, all the way out to Rolleston. That area grows by, in rough numbers, by about 100,000 people per decade. In order to house those people, we need 40,000 additional houses, and with that come an additional 90,000 cars each and every decade. So the scary part there is highlighted. Under business as usual, even if we tried, we could not fit an additional 90,000 cars onto the road network in Christchurch without gridlocking ourselves. And that's before we even start thinking about climate implications. So some more stats for your general amusement. Electric vehicles make up 0.25% of the car fleet in Christchurch at this point in time. Public transport use is declining, believe it or not. We have about 250 buses, and as of last week, 3 of them are electric. Cycling is increasing, and it's doing so fast, double increases for the last few years. Good work by Christchurch City Council on that front. We have an incredibly high car ownership rate in Christchurch. 913 vehicles per 1,000 population. Now that's counting everybody. That's counting babies. That's counting old people, blind people. That is incredible. That is roughly 200 vehicles per 1,000 population higher than in the other 2 big centres in New Zealand. And that is also 100 vehicles per 1,000 population higher than the United States, that we often probably think of as car-made. Now if they are car-made, what does it make us?
Crazy. Insane.
Insane, yeah. So this is what's happening in public transport in the 3 big centres in New Zealand. So what you look at here is the stats for the last 16 years. So this is over time. So 2019 back to 2003. And what I show on the vertical axis is the amount of usage of public transport per person per year. So the top line, that's Wellington. Steady as she goes, good 70 trips per person per year. Down here, what we'll see is Auckland, that's the red line here. They had the same performance in 2008 as us, and they've since left us in their dust. They're now more than twice as high as Christchurch. And in Christchurch, we obviously experienced an earthquake and never recovered from that in terms of the patronage. And when the central city started getting to life again, coming to life again, when the people started moving back, the jobs started moving back into the central city, that is when public transport started declining, and we have had for the last 5 years declining patronage numbers in public transport in Canterbury. It's outrageous. What are we doing? What's going on there? That needs some decent leadership, I would suggest. So let's come to the Northern Arterial. It's a project that's being jointly delivered by the Transport Agency and the Christchurch City Council. The council is doing the part south of QE2 Drive, and that road is going to open sometime next year, and it's, as it was originally planned, it is going to dump a lot of cars into St Albans and is going to divide that community into 2. And I've done a lot of work with the St Albans Residents Association and some very committed people in that area, and developed a counter proposal. And Mark is here. He's one of the key people who I would like to acknowledge. And has Emma turned up yet? No, she's still to come. And the question that I asked really early on is, will this even work? You know, a few years ago, we 4-laned the southern motorway, and by doing so, we now have 4 lanes of uninterrupted traffic flow, trying to fit into a 4-lane arterial road, Brown Street, that is controlled by traffic lights, where up to a third of the time is being given to the side streets. What that has resulted in is it has turned Brown Street into Christchurch's biggest car park for 3 hours each weekday. So with the Northern Arterial, we're taking 4 lanes of uninterrupted traffic flow and trying to stick this into a 2-lane arterial road, disrupted by traffic lights. And even if we put the clearways in, this is hardly going to work any better than what we've already stuffed up with Brown Street. So what are we doing? Am I the only one who can spot that this isn't going to work? Yep.
Brown Street works really well. I'm sorry, I use it regularly. It works really well.
Oh, good. You turn up at the wrong time.
3 o'clock in the morning.
So the question is, can we change how people from north of the Waimakariri River travel into Christchurch? And I tell you, yes, we can, and we can do so quickly. What it needs is we need to get the 4 key stakeholders who work on this to collaborate really closely. So with the regional council providing a superb bus service, with the transport agency and Christchurch City providing bus priority lanes, with Waimak District doing that part to the bus infrastructure for rerouted services in their district. And possibly most importantly, is Christchurch City starting to charge for parking where commuters currently park on streets for free. So the science behind all of this is actually quite simple. And all it needs is some political will to make it happen. So here's the proposal. Sorry, you can't see the map on the screen. You can see it on my computer if you're interested in it. But so the first part of the proposal is to have a new bus route that comes from Rangiora via Kaiapoi and goes into the central city along the Northern Arterial. So that's the blue line on the screen here. And the objective of doing this is to provide an alternative to driving. The second part of the proposal is to have priority measures in place that work. So bus lanes on the Northern Arterial that are permanent, and on Cranford Street, part-time bus lanes to Edgware Road, where the bus would then go across into Manchester Street, and then some very simple traffic restrictions on Manchester Street so that the buses don't get stuck in too much traffic. And by doing this, the objective would be to make sure that the bus is faster during the peaks than driving.
Well, how much?
The third part is to introduce paid parking in areas where commuters currently park for free and where the parking demand is quite high. So in the central city, that would be outside of that area there shown by the red cordon. Within the cordon, parking is already controlled and regulated to some extent, but outside there's a few thousand car parks on the streets that get taken up by commuters first thing in the morning, each and every day to park. There's about 4,000 car parks within the 4Fs like this. We couldn't and shouldn't just do this in the central city. It needs to be done in other areas where parking demand is high, around the malls, for example, the big malls, around the university, in areas of high employment like Sydenham and Eddington. And the objectives of doing this are twofold. Firstly, to raise funds to finance much better bus services, and secondly, to dampen the demand for driving. And you might say, well, I've never actually heard a politician talk about wanting to start charging for parking where it's currently free. So why are you doing that, and what are the people going to say to that? So bring it on, exactly. So what Councillor Dion Swix sits there, and I have been doing over the last few weeks is to go around the Central City residents groups and explain to them how we could develop the city, making sure that we go forward, that we don't gridlock ourselves, that we reduce our carbon footprint, what it is that we need to do in order to achieve all these things. And one of the components is to introduce priced parking in their residential streets. And obviously you don't want to punish local residents in their local street for having a need to park on the streets. So therefore what we are suggesting to them is the council is just about to have a system in place whereby you can get yourself an exemption. If there's parking restrictions in your local street, you buy yourself one of these exemptions, and then you can park on the streets without having to pay. And these exemptions don't come for free, and you will have to pay for that. And by and large, people say, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, no, we can. We put up with that. Yeah, we can see the point of doing this. And so we've had quite good reception from the wider public on this.
Well, it's quite good, mate.
Hang on. Questions afterwards.
We've also been to see the Central City Business Association, Paul Lonsdale, who most of you will probably know, and said, look, Paul, this is what we want to do, and here's why. What do you think of it? And Paul said, what we can't do is we cannot introduce paid parking just in the central city where it's currently free, because that would send the wrong signal to people. Like, we create the perception of don't come. And although this new paid parking would only target commuters, perception is everything. He said, if we do this everywhere where parking demand is high, also outside of the central city, then it's good for business. We don't create this perception of don't come to the central city, and our retailers would benefit from it, because all these parks that are taken by commuters cannot be used by those people who want to go shopping. So they say this is going to be good for business. Bring it on. And then there's an interesting relationship between this commuter parking, this free commuter parking, and our desire to have more people move into the central city. So for example, the units that are built, supposed to be built in the East Train, they are really slow selling. And they come, they're not unreasonably priced. I mean, everything in terms of properties is too high, and maybe they've pitched it too high as well. And they all come with their own car park. But what stops people from buying these things, and I've heard this several times now, is if you were to buy one of these units, there's absolutely nowhere for a visitor to go and park, because it's all taken up by commuters who can park there for free all day long. So it's this parking management, or the lack thereof, that the City Council is providing that stops us from repopulating the central city. Interesting, eh? So I've shown you this slide before, but this time what I've added to it is Queenstown. In Queenstown, they introduced a completely revamped bus service in November 2017, and it was a phenomenal success that they didn't expect to be as good as it turned out to be. And the really interesting component of what they did is this approach that I'm also suggesting for Christchurch, whereby the district council worked with the wider population, and they gained an agreement that the area where paid parking can be provided is to be greatly expanded, and the additional revenue that the district council there gained from this was given to the regional council, because it's the regional council there in charge of providing public transport services, and with that additional funding they have provided a magnificent new bus service, and within a couple of months they nearly trebled the bus usage in Queenstown, and they are now at a higher level, or they immediately went to a higher level than the public transport use in Christchurch on a per population basis. Now, they have a lot of tourists there in Queenstown, of course. In fact, the same number of tourists as we have here in Christchurch. But they have the buses full all year round, even in between the two tourist peaks. So it's not just the tourists who are making use of these buses in Queenstown, it's the locals. Incredible how successful it was. And it is this Queenstown experience that convinces me that if we made a fundamental improvement to public transport services in Christchurch, we would get a step change in usage. Not a tripling as in Queenstown, but something that would bring us into catch-up mode with Auckland. So what I suggest is the time to act is now. And in terms of the Northern Arterial, what the four key stakeholders really ought to agree on is that mode shift should be their target, their primary target. That results in less driving and more use of public transport. And the City Council's part in this should be to part finance the regional council's bus provision, and the way that gets financed is through increased parking revenue. With regards to the wider transport emissions, coming back to that, now the council, both the City Council and the Regional Council, they have both recently declared a climate emergency. But we haven't really had a public debate what that actually means and what it is that we should be doing different. And I suggest, let's start this debate. Let's see what people have to say, you know. Is everybody as worried about what's going to happen to the climate as I am? You know, why are the school children on the streets striking? You know, should we leave this to them, or should we adults try and sort this out? And the question that arises from this is, should we adopt the targets as set by the IPCC? And if so, how do we actually go about reducing driving, the distance driven in Christchurch each and every year for the next 11 years by 5%? How do we do this? How do we achieve this? So here's where the Northern Arterial is at. What the road controlling authorities have over the last few months agreed on is to provide a high occupancy vehicle lane, whereas what our group is asking for is bus lanes. What they want to provide is the HOV lane in a southbound direction only, and what we are saying is no, the bus lanes are needed in both directions, both towards the city and from the city. What they've agreed on to build is an HOV lane that stops nearly half a kilometre short of the roundabout that is under construction on Cranford Street, whereas we say no, the bus lane needs to go all the way to the traffic lights at Innes Road. What they want to provide is peak hour lanes for all traffic south of Innes Road, and what we say is no, these peak hour lanes, they should be for buses only. What they want to provide is an express bus during 4 peak hours only, and we say no, we need limited stop services during the normal bus operating hours. What they want to provide is express buses every 10 minutes during the peaks, and we say that's not good enough. They should actually run more frequently, maybe every 5 minutes. and they don't want to provide any buses during the day outside of the peaks, and we say no, the limited stop services, they should operate every 10 to 15 minutes during the day in the interpeaks. So what do I conclude from this? Public transport in Christchurch is declining, and that's scandalous. We really need to get on top of this, and I don't think that the wider public actually understands that this is, it's the regional council that provides the bus services, but it's what the city council does and doesn't do determines how successful the regional council is with that. Whether the buses get stuck in traffic or whether the buses have their own lane to bypass the traffic. So the city council has a huge role to play in making ECan successful with public transport. We haven't really started the discussion on what is it that we as a local community should do towards the climate emergency that we are facing, and what do we do about transport, which causes more than half of those emissions. And the Northern Arterial, whilst it is pointing in a much better direction than it was back in March, I think, when we started working on this. It's looking a lot better, but much more work is needed. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Axel. You've kicked over a few hornets' nests there.
Yes,
Wonderful.
just the same metaphor.
Right. Were you the interjector?
Yes, I was the
All right, okay. We'll give the interjector, and then we shut him up.
Yes, I was the interjector. I was born in this city in 1951.
Speak the microphone.
Can't hear you. Yeah, I was born in the city in 1951.
Good to hear that. Good to hear.
I live in the 21st century, and I look forward right into this century. I'm sorry, I disagree with you on so many levels that I don't know really where to start. But if you'll bear with me, or Gary will bear with me quickly. The climate change thing, the emissions thing, can be cured comparatively quickly by electric cars. And we have enough electricity coming out of Manapuri to run our electric car fleet. And it would probably return, the cost of that fuel paid by independent people would probably return to the government of Jolly more than Camelco is at the moment. So that's the emissions done. Really, really simple. And it wouldn't cost the taxpayer any money at all, because renewal of vehicles, of course, is a private expense.
We're
Hang on, one at a time.
The three examples you show of other cities, Auckland, Wellington and Queenstown, are very different geographically to Christchurch. Christchurch is as flat as a pancake and spread out like a pancake. All the others have an isthmus in Auckland, a harbour in Wellington, and a lake and mountains in Queenstown, which causes long rivers of development, which is ideal for public transport because the people are not great distances away from the main transport routes. So to me, your examples don't carry the weight that you give to them. Christchurch is a commuter city, and that people get in their cars and they drive all over it. The reason that and I have a bit of knowledge of this, of Fletcher Development's things and the 20,000 central city number of people they want, is that we're also a suburban city. We are the people who like big cities have left. We all like our little patch of ground. We are not apartment dwellers in the city. Anyway, I'll leave it there. Gary's looking bored.
Thank you, Gordon. Hang on, do you want to respond to that?
Yes, first point, electric cars, that falls short on two fronts. First front is under business as usual, we are going to gridlock ourselves, as I explained. So that isn't solved by electric cars. The second point with electric cars is any car being manufactured, half the carbon emissions actually get produced during manufacture of that car. It doesn't matter whether it's an electric car or with an internal combustion engine. So your solution basically runs out in 2030 when we need to work on the next half of the emissions that we need to get rid of. So the other thing, yes, there are big geographic differences between Christchurch, Wellington, Auckland and Queenstown, but that doesn't explain why we are going backwards. I'll leave it at that.
I think it's quite erroneous to compare Christchurch with Queenstown. Queenstown had a lousy bus service, so you're operating on a base that would really improve. But as an avid bus user in Christchurch, I think we've got a wonderful bus service. But I think it's pretty naive to think that it's going to cure all the ills if we improve the service between Rangiora or wherever in Christchurch. I think buses have reached their peak in Christchurch. Cars are going to continue to be king.
I don't think they're agreeing with you.
I mean, the earthquakes certainly didn't help, but what then finished the bus service off is the hubs and spokes system that got introduced in two stages, first in December 2012 and the next stage late 2014 if I remember correctly. And yes, if you live on one of the 5 core routes you have marvelous service. If you are reliant on one of the feeder services that go to the hubs, that's where we are losing everybody, because that has become so poor, the level of service. It basically doesn't work in Christchurch because we have zero ability to make sure that at the end of the day, when people go home, when they travel from the city or from wherever they come from to one of the hubs, there is absolutely zero guarantee that you will get one of the connecting services, and those connecting services, they run, some of them run only every 30 minutes, some of them run every 60 minutes, and you miss your connection and wait for half an hour on hour, once or twice, and if you've got any choices, you're done with public transport. That is why things aren't working in Christchurch, and that needs a fundamental review. It's a homemade problem.
Yeah, that's right. Completely right.
Yeah.
Axel, 2 questions. What is your target difference in time coming from Rangiora to town between being in a bus and in a car? That's my first question. The other question is, in your controlling parking in downtown streets, will electric vehicles be free? Because your whole premise is around climate change. If you're going to focus on that, then I'll just ask those 2 questions.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. First one, no, I don't have a target. So, I think 2 steps back. If we have this discussion, what do we do about our transport emissions? And if we agree that yes, it is sensible that we actually dial down on how much we emit. If we come to that conclusion, then it becomes politically a lot easier to say, right, we make sure that public transport doesn't get stuck in other traffic. So, like this example, at the moment the HOV lanes are proposed to stop 450 meters north of the roundabout. So the buses can use the HOV lanes, and then to get from where the HOV lane finishes through the intersection with Innes Road, that might take 5 minutes, 6 minutes, something like that during the peaks. It takes forever. So if we are serious about making sure that public transport runs, we would provide a lane all the way to the limit line, which then in turn means that we quite significantly reduce the throughput of this intersection for cars. So the more principled we are about this approach of what it is that we want to achieve, the longer it will take you to drive a car during the peak compared to riding a bus. So that's why it's totally impossible to predict any targets, but I can tell you it'll be a lot quicker. Second part of your question.
Can I just stop you there?
Sure.
Because I was on the transit board when we decided to run bus lanes from North Shore through to centre of Auckland, and created a bus lane all the way through over the bridge and everything. And there was huge hostility towards it to start with.
Yeah.
And it's been an absolute massive success.
Yes.
And they're now having to build larger car parks for people to park their cars so they can get on the buses.
Yeah.
And people saw the buses driving past them as they were sitting in blocked lanes on the harbour bridge and right through into the middle of Auckland. So there's a New Zealand precedent, and it's actually worked. It worked much better than any of our predictions.
This particular proposal, this could be almost as successful as the Northern Busway that Gary is talking about. I see this as basically, putting a defibrillator on the Christchurch bus services and restarting its heart. What happened in Auckland there, what Gary is talking about, what the people were moaning about is, he said, come on, North Shore people are rich. They don't take a bus. You're kidding yourself, And so they put this bus service on in 2008, and it immediately took 500 cars off the parallel motorway during the morning peak. Now, fast forward to now, there is 10,000 people on buses in the morning peak hour alone, traveling into Auckland. Absolutely phenomenal success. Absolutely phenomenal.
And it cut the time down quite considerably for people on the bus.
Yeah, and time is one thing, but the reliability, that's the other thing. If you don't get stuck in traffic, that is what people value much more than it being time. As long as it's predictable, if it takes 20 minutes or half an hour, whatever it is, you do your social media or you read your book, people really value the reliability. Coming back to your question, Brian, second question. No, the short answer is no. I think we should go to try and electrify our car fleet in a bit of a hurry, but it is really just a short-term thing, because in the longer term we probably should reorganize the way we arrange our lives, how we conduct ourselves in a much more radical way than just giving everybody their own electric car.
It may not be appropriate to tonight's emphasis, but it's quite relevant. Why aren't we running trains from Amberley to Ashburton?
Why aren't we running trains from Amberley to Ashburton? Yes, I totally agree with you. I was one of the people who have been organizing the series of workshops of rapid transit or passenger rail and housing for Canterbury, and we concluded that last night after the 5th workshop, and we'll be blogging about the outcome very shortly. So go to Talking Transport,
I'll put that out on the news, you send it to me.
and that's where we will report on the results, what this working party over the last 5 months has come up with.
I'd just like to sort of extend things a bit, because I'm gobsmacked by your statistic of 913 vehicles per 1,000 people. I think that's quite extraordinary, but you've focused largely on commuting. And one of the issues for me, who's now a sort of reformed cyclist who lives near a large secondary school, is kids being transported to school in large SUVs every morning and every afternoon, which is not only a hazard but blocks up roads. And it's astonishing at the moment, now that the term break has just started, that you can walk or cycle up Hattonley Road and the traffic jams have mysteriously disappeared. Now if we go back a generation or two, most kids got themselves to school, and it seems to me that we're inculcating rather negative habits with respect to climate disaster and such things, if they're such precious cargo that they have to be transported day by day. So one of the things that I would really like to see the City Council do is to work with schools around ways of independently getting kids into school. And one of the ways in which that might work is if less SUVs are providing traffic jams outside schools, which is what makes it so dangerous for kids to get themselves to school. So it's a perpetuating cycle. And I'd really like to see us do something about the journey to school. I think it's a big issue with respect to capacity.
It's actually not really that hard to achieve that. Again, it really needs just a little bit of political will. And I've seen it, I was still living in Germany when it became common for municipalities to roll out area-wide 30k speed limits. You know, if it wasn't a main road, the limit went to 30. For the first 10, we started in the 80s. In the first 10 years, all the local authorities were forced by legislation to make physical changes so that you wouldn't want to drive any faster than 30. But you know, it took those 10 years and it became absolutely normal and socially accepted that if you're not on a main road, you drive at 30. And one of the big unintended consequences of doing so was that people started cycling again. And so, for example, it turned Berlin, which never had a cycling history in its entire history, into a city of cyclists. And it's now one of the cities in the world with over 1 million population, one of the highest mode share in cycling. And it started in the back streets. People just started cycling in the back streets of Berlin, and the city council then after a few years reacted to it by building separated infrastructure along the main roads, and it's turned things around. And so and it's the children as well as the adults who have taken this up, and it's all to do with traffic speed.
Now, we've got a whole lot of questions and we've got a few minutes, so where you go.
I was going to play devil's advocate, but all my advocacy questions have been taken. I was going to ask 3 questions, but with time short, I'll ask one. I lived in Portland, Oregon, a few years ago, and I worked on a college, and the college was not unique, but businesses and educational facilities and places of employment had to develop traffic management plans, which might have included a dedicated bus service. I mean, we don't have traffic management plans in our businesses here, but it could be something to think about, that's taken into account. You know, the geography of Christchurch has changed quite significantly with massive development, Hornby, the airport. People commute from Rangiora, they take their kids to Yalthurst School maybe. The geography of schools changed, particularly for the wealthier, well-to-do people, but it really does take a more broad, well-managed, you know, integrative point of view. I love the idea of charging for parking, treat the central city like, or suburban areas like any other part of the city. But public transport isn't just going to do it. It requires a lot more management.
Portland's
You don't
brilliant.
need to answer that one.
Good.
That's more of a statement. How
Yeah,
about writing
it is.
something for the Tuesday Club notes?
About
There you go.
Portland, yeah.
Yeah.
Because Portland's actually, the one-way streets through Portland, the speed limit is 13 miles, 13 miles per hour.
And the Sunday.
20 something.
Sunday.
No, it's 30 kilometres, 20 miles an hour. Most American small cities, even big
This is
cities.
the one-way system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember it being 30. But
Just
30
a quick
kilometres.
point on the IPCC statement of 1.5 degrees. I mean, that is extremely conservative. It does not take into account feedbacks. It does not take into account melting of the Antarctic. It does not take into account a lot of stuff. So that is extremely conservative.
Okay.
If I were a betting man, I certainly wouldn't like my chances with a 50% probability. And that's what the IPCC says itself.
There you go.
Yes, my question is about, I don't live very far from the center city, but I would like to attend some of these great things in Hagley Park and so on. I don't have children, but I have a dog. And my dog is medium sized, not small, but medium sized. I would like to bring him on my bus, on a bus, in order to go to the central city. What is your idea about pets on buses?
Well, I grew up in Germany, and in Germany, dogs are just a normal part of life. They go everywhere where their owners go. You take them into a butcher shop.
I understand that, but what's your position in Christchurch, not in Germany?
It's a
In your big picture here.
a cultural restriction that we have that I don't know why it's there.
It's worth thinking about.
Because we're the highest population.
Right.
Okay, thanks very much, Axel. Brilliant discussions. I think there's some great things coming through this. And just a couple of issues. Firstly, some has been covered already, but clearly, if we go all electric, we don't reduce the number of vehicles. If we don't solve the congestion problem, we might solve some of the issue of emissions. So be careful how closely you tie those two things together, because otherwise people think the simplistic solution is just go all electric. It takes a while. The question I wanted to come to, there's been a bit of subliminal advertising on here, because you've shown some light rail vehicles in behind, some electric buses and so on, but you've said very little in fact about that, other than when that question came up about trains and so on. And I wonder if you have a comment on light rail. From my knowledge of it, whenever you go change to rail, almost inevitably the number of people who are prepared to change don't like buses, lose cruisers, put them on rail, it makes a huge difference. And my understanding, and Gary may correct me on this, but the way that what's been developed on North Shore has also been designed in the fullness of time that could actually be converted to light rail when it gets so busy that buses won't do it anymore. So any comment on this?
Yes, with Mark and Emma, we've been to a lot of the stakeholders over the last few months and had quite in-depth discussions. And with the Chat Club, where we organised the passenger rail and housing workshops, we did the same, going around the authorities and talking to them. And what has become totally clear to me is the amount of parochialism that you find in local government is astonishing. And I think the vexed question of how do we get rail going again, we will probably have to actually go through some kind of change in governance first to overcome this parochialism which is stopping us from making decisions that are useful for the region. So that would be my answer to you, David.
Hi Axel. I'd like to ask you a little bit about cycling. You said some good news that it's increasing rapidly, but 40 years ago when as a young woman I came to Christchurch, I stood on the edge of Hagley Park in total awe at the hundreds and hundreds of cyclists streaming in and across Hagley Park. And then when I came back to live here, they disappeared. how can we actually get back those glory days back again? They didn't have off-road cycleways then, you know. Yeah.
They had the onslaught of cheap imports from Japan. And here's a little anecdote for me. 1995, I was sitting in a movie theater in Germany with my Kiwi girlfriend, and we were watching Heavenly Creatures. And that opened with these scenes from 1950. You know, you looked on Colombo Street, High Street, all the trams, and hundreds of bikes, and all this lovely architecture that we've had here until the earthquakes, or much of that galaxy knocked down before. And I thought, oh, look at that city. Isn't that lovely? What a shame that I'll never get to Christchurch because it's so far away. And a year later I was living here.
Thank you, Axel, for giving us a lot to think about, certainly around investment in transport. Where do you think, in that context of investment, ECan's plans to put up bus fares fits?
It doesn't.
To be honest with you, I don't think that bus fares is anywhere near the biggest thing that we should be worrying about. Where I have criticisms is not with the bus fares going up per se, is the stupid system that we've got that doesn't actually try and drag people in and make the occasional user a regular user. You cannot buy a monthly pass, you know, whereby you pay the same amount whether you travel during the peak, where it's really expensive to provide those peak services, and off-peak, you know. We don't differentiate between those periods. Auckland on 7th September is going to introduce free weekend travel for under 16s, you know. This encourages whole families and gives them the opportunity to travel by public transport. Why aren't we thinking about those kinds of things that could actually fill the buses that over the weekends aren't really that full, you know? They could actually take a lot of people in without it costing any more to provide the service. There is so much we can do with fares, but raising the fares a little bit, that isn't the biggest problem. The biggest problem is something completely different.
Hi Axel. Hey. Look, just on behalf of the St Albans residents, I'd actually like to say thank you. And really, you know, he's stepped up and given us a huge amount of belief in what we could actually, in being able to move forward in a really terrible predicament. And this is a guy that we need actually elected to ECan. That's just a simple fact.
Craig, no, we have to stop.
He had a question, do we support supporting the 1.5 RBCC thing, and I thought we should have a vote.
I don't think there'd be any problem with the vote then. Not in this room.
Aren't you willing to try?
I don't think there'd be a problem. Aye. All those in favour? Aye. As I said, I joined the council because I had a pathological loathing of what engineers came up with, despite the one or two witty ones in the room.
And you're a petrol head.
Yes, I am a petrol head.
You was.
And I just sold one and bought electric bikes. There you go.
It wasn't a working one.
That's true. In Michael Williams' interest, there was a French one, so it'll probably never go. So anyway, can you leave the room, please? I'm finding it disruptive at both ends. But the thing that I've always loved about working in public policy is the complexity of it. The fact that we've got a whole series of opinions in this room, we're all affected by it, And Axel, to me, has thought things through in a really measured and sensible way. And there will always be debates about change. And I can remember I was on the Transit and Land Transport and NZTA boards, and the debates that we had there were the same as this. You know, and some of the debates we were having there, I was absolutely pissed off that we were spending $1 million a metre on a road in the middle of Auckland to keep Auckland Harbour open, when we should have been talking about investing in Tauranga or Whangarei. And those debates take so long, and that's, I haven't been on that board for 10 or 11 years, and they're just starting to deal with it now. But we need intelligent people leading us into the new places that we need to be. And I've found it inspiring, Axel, and I really think everyone would join with me in saying thank you.
Beer.
And I'm going to